Today we're going to try something different. We're going to ask the question, who was Baruch Spinoza? And by the end of this video, you'll know the answer. Let's get started. Baruch Spinoza was born in the Dutch Republic in 1632. But before we can tell you about what he did, we first have to tell you where he was born. Because for all that the Dutch are known for their windmills and tulips and bikes, they weren't really around back then. Instead, it was the Portuguese who had settled in the region and the Spanish who ruled it who were in charge. And little baby Baruch was actually born into a family of these Portuguese Jews, which meant that they followed a version of Judaism that was heavily influenced by Arabic culture. And while that's great, because if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have things like the Spanish Inquisition, it did mean that Spinoza's family kept kosher, which is a set of rules about food that observant Jews follow. This included not eating pork, mixing meat and milk, or working on the Sabbath. And it was the last of these that got them in trouble. See, when Spinoza was 9 years old, his father passed away, leaving his mother and him to run the family business. And since running a business is hard and also really expensive, she hired someone to help take care of young Baruch so that he could just focus on selling textiles. Only problem was that this supposed helper was a non-Jew. Among other things, he made little baby Baruch work on the Sabbath. Instead of letting him spend time with his family, praying or eating delicious forbidden foods, I don't know. The Torah says that working on the Sabbath is such a big no-no that God will actually punish you for it. So after some time of hearing about this, he was like, "Mom, either fire this dude or get me out of here." She tried reasoning with him, but he was having none of it. And so she decided that she had no choice but to send him off to study at a yeshiva or Jewish school. Now, this is probably for the best for little baby Spinoza. As one of the major figures of the Spanish Inquisition, a man named Alonso de Santa Cruz was visiting the city that they lived in at the time, and he was looking for people to burn at the stake. Now, if you know anything about the Spanish Inquisition, you might be wondering, wait a minute, aren't stakes used for barbecues? Why would you use that for burning people? Well, the thing is, the Spanish Inquisition didn't do the whole pointy wooden stake thing. That was the stereotypical image of witches being burned at the stake, mostly from the Salem witch trials. Instead, the Spanish Inquisition preferred to burn people on big piles of rocks. I don't know why either, but they liked the crunchier texture. But anyway, because Spinoza's mom was pretty connected in the community, she was able to get word to him that he needed to hide until this guy left town. And luckily she did, because when Santa Cruz came to her house looking for him, she was able to fool him by saying that her son had gone to live with another family. And once Santa Cruz left, she sent him off to live with relatives in another city. This was a huge traumatic event in Spinoza's life, and he never saw his mother again. But it did give him an appreciation for the value of freedom of thought and religious tolerance, which he would later become famous for. He also picked up and studied Latin, which helped him learn about the classical Greek and Roman philosophers, which he became very interested in. Eventually he went back to his hometown and opened up a shop with his sister. But he still wasn't done with school, and he spent his free time learning all kinds of stuff from philosophy to math to optics. In fact, he eventually became such an expert on optics that he made lenses for telescopes, spyglasses, and microscopes. And this part of his life is actually pretty interesting because a lot of people think that the Dutch East India Company, which had its headquarters in Amsterdam, was the first company in the world. But it was actually the second. See, the first company in the world was founded by Galileo Galilei in 1565 called the Armillary and Spectacle Company, which sold the navigational instruments that he invented. And then almost exactly 40 years later, the Dutch East India Company was formed. So yeah, the Dutch were the second guys to do it. Sorry, Drake. Anyway, by this point, Spinoza had totally immersed himself in secular philosophy and had rejected the traditional beliefs of his religion. So when his fellow Jews found out, they kicked him out of the community, which in addition to being morally reprehensible is terrible for business. And so in 1660, he moved to Amsterdam and changed his name to Benedictus de Spinoza. He also spent some time in France, England, and Germany, but ultimately returned to the Netherlands, where he lived out the rest of his life. There he wrote 3 major works, which together are known as the Spinozas. They are the Ethics, the Treatise on the Improvement of the Understanding, and the Collected Letters of Spinoza. And these works contain most of his major philosophical ideas, which we'll cover in a bit. But first we have to talk about his system of thinking, because it's actually quite unique. Unlike the scholastics before him, who were mostly concerned with reconciling faith and reason, Spinoza took a radically different approach. See, for centuries, philosophers had been trying to figure out how mind and body interact. How does this immaterial thing inside our heads cause our brains to move and our muscles to twitch and make that thing go? And the scholastics had come up with a bunch of ways to explain it, but they all had one thing in common. They used a special kind of substance called Cartesian dualism. Basically the idea that there's two types of substances in the universe, mind and body. Meanwhile, Spinoza asked a simple, what if there's only one? What if everything is really just matter in motion? And then he went ahead and proved it. Okay, fine, actually he didn't prove it. Turns out that you can't actually prove that because Gödel's incompleteness theorems say that any formal axiomatic system can never prove its own consistency. But still, he argued that this makes way more sense. Because if everything is made out of the same stuff, then we should be able to understand everything in terms of that stuff. Otherwise, you'd be stuck with this immaterial thing that doesn't follow the laws of nature and therefore is outside of science. But okay, how does everything work if there's only one substance in the universe? Well, he said, everything is determined by necessity. Nothing happens randomly or for no reason. Every event has a cause, and every cause has an effect. And these causes and effects are governed by laws that are eternal and immutable. That means that even though the future hasn't happened yet, it's still just as real as the past, because it's predetermined. And this was a really radical idea because it actually eliminated the concept of free will. You see, if everything is caused by something else, and nothing can happen without a reason, then there's no room for humans to choose what they want to do. Instead, we're all just puppets of the universe, and our actions are simply the inevitable result of prior events. And this isn't the kind of thing that people want to hear. I mean, maybe in the modern era, where we already knew that our choices were being tracked and predicted by algorithms, this wouldn't be such a big deal. But this was in the mid-17th century, and people really liked their free will. For one thing, it made them feel special. If we're just things made of the same stuff as planets and stars and trees and rocks, then why should we think that we're anything more than just animals? And for another thing, it let them blame themselves for doing bad things. If everything is predetermined, then how can you ever be held responsible for anything? All that aside though, Spinoza's system of thinking had some really interesting implications for how we understand the natural world. For example, he proposed that the ultimate cause of the universe was something that he called God or nature, which was really just the sum total of all things. Basically, it's the universe itself. He described it as an infinite substance that contained everything within it. And this is where Spinoza gets a little woo-woo. He said that this infinite substance is actually identical to the human mind, which means that by understanding nature, we actually understand ourselves. And this is where the famous quote comes from, that he who knows much can do much. But he also warned against blindly accepting what we're taught, urging us instead to think for ourselves and use our reason to determine the truth. And this is where the famous quote comes from, that if the light of nature is to be thine, it must be sought for diligently, for it is not given to lazy people. But maybe the best thing that he did was show us how philosophy can be used as a tool to better understand ourselves and the world around us.
Thanks for watching.